Now that we've started to create some animations, we're ready to start batch rendering. Batch rendering allows you to render out a series of still images and save them to disk. Now you do have the render view, but the render view is only designed to render one frame at a time while you're inside the program. Of course, it's great for tests, but you can't render out an entire animation sequence through it. Therefore, you have to batch render. So how do you batch render? Well, the first step is to check all your render settings in the Render Settings window. That contains a number of attributes that are critical for determining how that batch render will occur. So let's go up to the Render Settings window. There's a shortcut up here in the status line. It has a picture of the clapboard with two little circles. I can click that. And there's a Render Settings window. There's also a menu item under Window, Rendering Editors, Render Settings. So here's the Render Settings window in its default state. I want to talk about several of the critical areas, and then we'll return to these in more detail in future videos. The first important thing is the Render Using attribute. This determines what render engine you're using. By default, it's set to My Software. However, if you do want to switch over to another rendering engine, you would change this menu. For example, here's Mental Ray. Below that, you'll see two or more tabs. There's a Common tab that has all the common attributes that are critical to any render. And then there'll be a tab, one or more tabs, designed for the actual rendering engine you're using. For example, we're on Maya Software now, so there's a single Maya Software tab. Let's go back to the Common tab. In terms of important areas in the Common tab, first place to check is the file output. This is where you pick your name of the file you're rendering out and your image format. Also the way it's named exactly on disk. Below that is your frame range. This determines that if you are rendering out more than one frame, what the range is. Below that is which camera you're rendering out in renderable cameras. Always good to check this. Below that is image size. This is a resolution of the images you're rendering out, and this is measured by pixels in terms of their width and height. So those are the critical areas to check. We're going to talk about all these in more detail. I'm going to go to the My Software tab now. Now, the software tabs are designed to set the rendering quality. For example, at the top is the anti-aliasing quality for Maya Software. We've already discussed Edge anti-aliasing, where you can change that menu from low to high quality. There's also a way to control that in greater detail in the number of samples section, the multi-pixel filtering section, and the contrast threshold section. This whole section is the quality settings for Maya Software. Deeper in, you have such specialized things as ray tracing. It's where you determine if you are ray tracing what the quality is. Also motion blur. Now some of these sections had checkboxes which we turned on in earlier videos. For example, if you did want to ray trace, if you just want to ray trace inside the render view, you have to turn it on here. So these settings do affect what you see in the render view. However, at the same time, if you want to make sure you have a correct batch render, you have to double check all the attributes. So that's a brief tour of the Render Settings window. I'm going to break down each of these areas in more detail and explain how they work in additional videos.